Really, the funny thing is that this DC Faces, I can't remember exactly what that acronym stands for. It's at thisiscommonsense.org. The name of the script is Shh, Not Now. But this DC Faces group that the Mayor Bowser, set up, it's about renaming statues and schools and different things. Every time I look at it, it seems like it reads defaces, kind of like all the graffiti and vandalism to statues and so on and so on. And I wonder, did they mean to do that?
That was Paul Jacob talking about his latest commentary at thisiscommonsense.org for Friday, September 4th, 2020. This is his podcast, This Week in Common Sense. My name is Timothy Virkala, and Paul and I are going to be talking about all 5 commentaries for the first week of September that have appeared on Paul's website. Paul's been writing daily commentary there since 1999. And as long as Facebook doesn't deplatform him, he posts on that social media platform too. Look for at This Is Common Sense. Okay, Paul, today's Common Sense was about politically correct renaming agenda in the nation's capital. Now what? What now?
Well, in Washington, like a lot of places now, Washington D.C., and we've talked about this before. They painted Black Lives Matter on 16th Street, very close to the White House, and there have also been protests. There have been some riots. There have been some destruction, but Mayor Bowser, through all of this, has also been working on a different track that involves not criminal justice, but racial justice, is the term. And the idea is to get rid of monuments that are to people that had some role in slavery or something that's deemed racist. And of course, there seem to be some double standards sometimes in terms of publicly whether somebody's transgressions a century or 2 centuries ago rise to that level or not. For instance, if you became president, oftentimes you get forgiven or maybe not forgiven. And I think there are people who want to keep monuments who kind of forgive presidents. And of course, I think anybody who looks at history has to recognize that slavery is part of human history. And it's just a horrible thing. It's why we should travel just as fast as we can the other direction to as much freedom as possible for everybody and to make it impossible for someone to hold you captive. And that's truer here in the United States, although there's still people who are kidnapped. We still have more slavery in the Middle East and in Asia and parts of Asia and so on. And so, and I'm not talking about the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, with their 1.4 billion slaves. I'm talking about more direct, daily physical control at all times. But the whole history of slavery and racism and America's experience with that is something that's worth remembering. It's worth learning about. I think this new move to let's change the name of everything or let's kind of go through and politically judge every person and place and thing is a big mistake. It's a lot of energy put to things that I don't think matter a whole lot. And I think there is a way to do it. I think we talked months ago. I've never liked living in Prince William County, Virginia. I don't like princes. I don't like kings. I don't like, queens. I don't like royalty. And, if life were endless, I'd probably petition in the petition process that doesn't exist in my county, unfortunately. But someday I'd create it. When I'm 97, I would somehow lobby it into existence and then work to put something on the ballot to change the name of our county. But in the end, that's not really the big problem in our lives, in our worlds, in our countries, our states, our cities. And it's getting a tremendous amount of attention. Um, and it's the sort of attention that is designed to separate people, to make all kinds of ridiculous judgments. And I think, it is intended to divide, and it could be done in a different way. And I think a lot of people just, would be more dismissive of it. Tim, I think you're more dismissive of it than I am. But because I certainly understand the feeling of, hey, this doesn't represent my view, and I really think that we ought to be very, very careful about spending a lot of time and resources trying to, fashion how everybody in future generations is supposed to see everything. I don't think that's really necessarily the role of government, to pick our heroes and build statues to them. I think it's stupid. It's kind of idolatry in a sense, and not just in a religious sense is it harmful. I think it's harmful in a political sense. I happen to really have read a lot and been very interested. The American experiment is tremendous, and we're talking about slavery, and so there's the big crime, the thing that didn't get done in the Revolution, that took a war and 800,000 people dead, and many more injured, and to rectify that. So I think I've always kind of thought of the framers of the Constitution, people like Jefferson and Washington, as tremendous people. I still do, but I sure do know that they're not perfect people, that they were flawed people. And you know what? That I might have met them if they'd been alive then and not liked them. I might have thought they were arrogant jerks or something. Who knows? That's not what we ought to spend any time revering. It wasn't that, boy, did they have personality. That's not what it's all about. All men are created equal. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words, so we salute Thomas Jefferson for writing those words. Why? Because those words are so darn important. Those words were, now it's kind of like, hey, where is it? It should be here. We've all kind of signed on to it. But at that, and not in the world and in reality, but in America, in our thoughts, hey, that's how everyone thinks, isn't it? But it wasn't how everyone thought then. And anyway, it's a tremendous thing that happened. But it doesn't mean we have to hide history. Doesn't mean we have to build monuments to these people. I remember years ago someone talking about the Constitution as a sacred document. And to me, I think maybe they were just kind of flubbing over the sacred, but a sacred document would mean that it was God inspired. And I don't think the Constitution was God inspired. It was men. And we have to look at it that way. So I'm sensitive to all of this because I think we do have a tendency to put people on pedestals and want to give short shrift to the real history. And the real history, I think, is freeing. It's illuminating. It means that we learn things that are important. Human nature hasn't changed that much, and I think if we know the real history of colonial times and the revolution and onward, we're helped, not hurt.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg of your piece on Friday.
In fact, that's not, my piece isn't really about
no
that, other than just to mention that for the first time, I think somebody came out and did finger, let's do something with the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial. And of course, it may not be, these aren't all that they would be torn down or something. They might put a plaque up to explain slavery and so on. Although that seems kind of silly because people already know that, but put it up. I mean, and if that's really what this is all about, it seems like we've all spent a lot more time on it than it really deserves. But it's about changing school names, and it's really about the power to kind of whipsaw around our society in some cultural revolution-esque way that I find a little bit disturbing. But that isn't what my piece is about either. What my piece is about is dishonesty and the way that our political system tends to work. And this case, this is a case of the Democrats doing it. I'm sure you could find cases of Republicans doing it. It seems to be thoroughly bipartisan. But Mayor Bowser put together this commission. DC Faces is the acronym, which you saw the opening. But she puts this group, and they get together and decide what school names need to change. Woodrow Wilson, any president who owned slaves at any point, that sort of thing. And there was quite a few. I think it was 21 public buildings, a certain number of schools that were being changed, parks being renamed, that sort of thing. But she releases it. And of course, it gets some headlines. And immediately after releasing it, the day after releasing it, the Washington Post, contacts the mayor's office and the people who wrote the report and made the list and so on. And nobody will talk to them. And immediately there's backlash because, of course, they've mentioned, the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial as places that either need to, have some sign or be removed or be renamed or whatever without any clarity whatsoever. So, kind of badly put out there. But what caught my attention was the fact that the headline in the Washington Post, if you go online, it's a different headline. They do this to me all the time. It drives me crazy. I will read the story in my morning paper, and it will have this headline that usually if I remember it, it's because it made me mad. And this one is all about, what a time to do this. And of course, right off the bat, there's a Democratic strategist who says, this is a terrible time to be bringing this up. And then there's the former CEO of the DC Chamber of Commerce saying, this should be brought up after the election. And of course, what smacks me in the face is here are all these people wringing their hands about the mayor doing something that is likely to be extremely unpopular. And their problem isn't with what she's doing, isn't with it being unpopular. Their problem is don't do it now. Hide it from the people. Don't let people close to the election know that this is really what you're thinking about and intending to do. Trick the voters, fool the voters, keep the voters disarmed by not telling them what you're really all about. And look, as I said, Democrats aren't the only one who would do that. But that's what's being done, and it's being done not just by politicians on a regular basis, or this Democratic strategist who was unnamed, or by the woman who was part of the Chamber of Commerce. It's being done by the Washington Post. The way the story was written, it was, what an idiot, don't do this. And of course, the story was written with the don't give Trump an opening because we know he's evil. I mean, isn't that a fact? And so the whole tone of the piece was the Washington Post advising, maybe advising too strong a word, but spinning it to where the problem is that Bowser wasn't politically smart and didn't properly trick the voters about what she's all about and what Democrats are all about. It's not a conspiracy. It's a bunch of people working the same way, not caring about the public, not believing that the public needs information to make the decision, and hoping that they can give them the information where they'll make the right decision, hoping they'll read our editorial so that they'll know what we think is right, and I hope they'll choose that. No, none of that. We will give you the information that we think will make you choose the way we want you to choose. And if anyone's going to give you information other than that, what on earth are they thinking of?
Now, this is a big issue right now for a number of stories because, Don Lemon this last week or so finally came out against the riots. He says this has gone too far. And then the day or two later, Joe Biden gave a big speech about how bad the riots were. So it seems
The
across the
Trump riots?
yeah. It seems across the board that they're trying that the media is just sort of another wing of the Democratic Party, and it seems really obvious. Doesn't it seem weird that the Washington Post is not even hiding it and is just sort of acting as the newsletter of the Democratic Party at this point? Because if you really were a conspiratorial mindset, or you're really trying to effectively uh, pull one over, you wouldn't say that in public.
We said, and I have some people I care about who are in the media who did not like the way I said it, in fact. But we said on election day, the day after election day, actually, in 2016, that the media lost the election. And we said that because they were so over the top. And maybe I'm just self-projecting, but I was not a never Trumper. I didn't vote for Trump. I voted Libertarian. But I wasn't a never Trumper, but I certainly was not excited about Trump. And I did not see Trump as an outsider. And I think I've probably mentioned in various podcasts my father, who voted for Trump in the primary in Arkansas, I think was the only person in our family who voted for Trump. Uh, and then he passed away before the general election, and would always say, he didn't like everything Trump did. Certainly, my father did not have the same demeanor that Donald Trump has by a long shot, maybe almost mirror opposites. But he said he's the only guy that will do something different. He's the only guy that's not the same as everyone else and just the status quo swirling around the drain, waiting to go down. Um, and the Washington Post, so my view was just sick that we've got Hillary Clinton could be president. She's the Democratic nominee. She's likely to be president. And we've got Donald Trump, who I'm scared of. I had a friend who would call me and during the election campaign in 2016, and his opening line was always, "Are you still scared?" And I would always say, "Yes, I am." To make a long story short, throughout the whole campaign, I'm reading the Washington Post, but I'm reading it as someone who's not happy that Donald Trump is running for president. And every morning, I find myself defending Donald Trump because I'm reading the Washington Post and hearing the ridiculous things they're saying and the way they're spinning things. And I'm thinking, I'm certainly not sympathetic to Trump, but my goodness, this is way over the top. And particularly, it was over the top enough that I started to wonder, maybe my dad was right. And he wasn't sure Trump would was the outsider, but there was a chance, he thought. And maybe other friends I have who see him as the outsider are not all wet. And you'll remember at Common Sense, this is commonsense.org, we used on a couple different commentaries, we used that picture of Trump and Melania and Hillary and Bill Clinton. I believe it was at Chelsea's wedding or something, somebody's wedding, but the four of them together to just show they're all part of the same crowd. Well, maybe not. But what's interesting is the media, in essence, by going way over the top in 2016, I think helped Trump. They helped cement him as the outsider. And I think the same thing is happening now. And I think there aren't really riots. They're mostly peaceful. Trump is, look at Portland. Trump's federal people, and look, I'm concerned about criminal justice reform, and federal police forces have done things that are outrageous, and local police have. It's not okay to shoot people. That's not the first resort. But at the same time, it's not okay to tear down and burn buildings and stuff. And so you see what happens, and to the average person, it's a big problem that Trump put federal people in Portland. He moves the federal people out. And what happens in Portland? Well, it seems to get worse, not better, worse. There's somebody dead. There's now the person who shot somebody is dead. Of course, he was killed in Washington State. But we watch the television, we read our newspaper, and if it doesn't make sense, we haven't been brainwashed for very long. I don't think it's set in very deep, and I think the public can see you didn't really, the Democrats didn't, the media didn't, and increasingly the kind of the Republican joke, which I've used myself of, the Democrats and the media, but I repeat myself. Um, but we see them treating riots as not so big a deal and having a certain narrative, and then all of a sudden it seemed like, and you read it in some of the stories, that the polling's tightening, and they think, oh, maybe we had the wrong view, and then all of a sudden they're demanding more things be done to quell the rioting, and they're, most important of all, blaming the rioting on Donald Trump and on his leadership or lack thereof and on his demeanor. And I think that's probably the best shot you can take at him, because I don't like his demeanor for the most part. But of course, if you're looking for an outsider who will fight and take all the crap that's going to be through, all the flack that's going to be shot at him from the powers in Washington, well, then maybe Trump is your guy. And that's what a lot of folks have thought all along. And it's why I think when people attack the Trump people as somehow, you don't care about morality, or you don't care about civility and so on. These are very civil people. These are very moral people. The people I know who like Donald Trump, they are okay with a bully getting into the ring in Washington and beating the crap out of the people who've been in Washington. And I'm not endorsing Donald Trump, as, hey, that's what we need, is someone who beats the crap out of the folks in Washington. But we do need somebody to beat the crap, figuratively, of out of the folks in Washington, and to change things. So that's the media is on the other side. Trump has succeeded in being able to make the media his named official opponent. And I think that is disastrous for the media long term. And I think short term it helps Donald Trump.
I understand why normal people who, let's say, fundamentalist Christians, just the old rednecks, whatever you want to say, with normal Americans, flyover country people, why they don't mind Trump being mean and nasty, and not just simply because he's an outsider, but because he's mean and nasty to people who've treated them badly for a long time. And he's sort of on their side in a sense. And being nice hasn't helped an American who wanted, let's say, to limit government and not go into huge deficit spending. It hasn't helped them. Of course, it hasn't helped them to vote for Trump either. I mean, so
when you said deficit spending, I was thinking, well, it hadn't got much help from Donald either.
So I don't know what normal people make of that, because I don't think people are thinking rationally about those things anymore. I think we're so far beyond rationality on the question of, is the government in good order? What is the State of the Union? Well, I think the State of the Union is actually quite bad. Every year the president has a State of the Union address, and he says the State of the Union is sound. How long has he been saying that? I don't know if I've ever heard anything different. Even when Trump gave his rather radically dark speech, he didn't come out and say the State of the Union was just, I think the State of the Union is actually terrible. I would say that it's in so many ways, but mainly, and I know it's kind of weird, but mainly because no level of government has a handle on debt and spending, and that's a real problem.
It is a real problem. Well, it's interesting because, and maybe it leads us to our next commentary, which you wouldn't necessarily think right off, but defying China for now. And the reason I mentioned this as a segue is that there's always the decoupling of our economy with China, which could come. In many ways, I want it to come, at least the threat of it, to back China off and to not continue to facilitate what China's doing, all over. I read something this week about how they're doing different things in Bhutan. And for those who don't know it, Bhutan is kind of on the edge of the Himalayas and very tiny country. And I know about Bhutan. I don't really know anything about it, but I know it exists because maybe 30, 40 years ago, I was writing some story and I needed a country, a throwaway country that nobody had heard of, and I picked Bhutan. But anyway, they are a real country because China is locked in some devious effort to try to undermine their borders and so on. I mean, it's there's always something going on in the world in which China's playing a bad role. But a lot of times people talk about the money that China has lent the United States. And I think a lot of times it's overstated in terms of just the sheer amount and as if somehow we're completely beholden to them now. But there is also the fact that, and to be honest, I'm not a economist. I don't understand all the monetary theory and practice, but I saw an article today where China was threatening to basically, do a new currency, and they've been doing this, I think, for years, but also to take things out of dollar holdings if things are going to come to a head with the United States. And frankly, it seems like we have been on stupid autopilot for a long time when it comes to fiscal matters. And anybody who has lived for a while on their own knows that fiscal matters are really important. And if you screw up, you can screw up all kinds of things. But if you don't screw up fiscal matters, you're in a lot better shape than if you do everything wonderfully, but you screw up fiscal matters. That's just my personal view. Feel free in the comments to disagree with me. I'm sure there'll be no comments. Anyway, this is, we're in a world that plays for keeps, and we've been playing on, hey, we can just do anything for anybody. No program ever has to work out. And we would argue with some of the philosophy that government can do all these things for people, but it does seem like if you're going to spend trillions and trillions of dollars over decades claiming to help people, you ought to have to show you help somebody at some point, somewhere, once, twice, maybe. And so it does seem like that the American government has become a laughingstock in its own country. And, there's some powerful forces out there in the world, and we're policing the entire world. Where at home, we have a dysfunctional republic. The representative system that we have is not working. And we're all over the world, and there are competitors out there. I'm concerned not only about the United States of America, but the whole world, because the U.S. can be a force, has been a force for good, and we seem to be, stumbling around our own country with our shoelaces tied together on purpose, I think. Because so much of this, and especially we were just talking about, the racial division, the criminal justice component of that, which is a huge component. But all of that, the American people are pretty doggone united on reforming criminal justice, on dealing with race issues where they present themselves, and oftentimes these issues are much bigger than just race. There are plenty of police brutality incidents where it's a white policeman beating up a white guy. So, it isn't all about race. But anyway, the public's ready to tackle it all. It's been our politicians who have not tackled it, both Republican and Democrat. And that's why it is right for Republicans to point out that these cities are Democrat-run cities. These police forces are hired by Democrats. These prosecutors are Democrat prosecutors. In fact, one of the used to be a prosecutor is running for vice president, Kamala Harris. So, it is right to point out what is being done that is outrageous. But anyway, they've tried to tear it apart by not fixing the problem, as you and I have discussed oftentimes, by allowing anarchy to go on. And that's the other side of this. Not only have they allowed police anarchy in a sense, but they are now allowing other anarchy and don't stop until they see that maybe the polling doesn't look so good on it. But those are two sides of a really, really rotten coin. And that doesn't have anything to do with China per se, but it does have to do with us having control over our government, because these festering issues are because we don't have control. If we did, it's not a matter of educating the public, it's a matter of giving the public the ability to force the right action. And speaking of that, again, it leads us to defying China for now. In this script, I'm talking about Google, Twitter, uh, uh, Facebook, tech
You mentioned
companies.
Yahoo too, also.
Oh, yes, I did. That's right. Well, in fact, I mentioned Yahoo because they are doing good things now, but years ago have been accused of, and it appears that they did help give China information to arrest two dissidents who were using their email system and so on. And U.S. companies, U.S. based companies, or I don't care if they're based on Mars, companies that are making money off of me and you and other folks in America, we ought to get together and try to hold them accountable to behave decently, to not help China build a surveillance state, to not help the United States of America build a surveillance state, to not help anybody do that, to not be the hired guns for tyrants. I think we have to say to Google and Facebook and Yahoo and Twitter and every tech company and every non-tech company, if you're in the NBA, if you want our business, you can't use slave labor. You can't be a toady for the Chinazis and help them build a totalitarian society. That is not that's not going to fly. And it looks like with this changeover in Hong Kong that all of those aforementioned companies have pulled back, have taken their information, their data off of servers in Hong Kong and moved everything to where the Chinese Nazis, the Chinese government cannot get it. And that is really good and really important. But we have to do more. The history of these companies is checkered, and we cannot allow people to get rich off of selling products and services to us who then turn around and help people tyrannize us or tyrannize somebody that speaks a different language on the other side of the world. So I think this is a great step, but it's something that we as Americans, and gosh, I wish our media would help us more. Maybe they will in the future. I think there's more attention on this than there was a year or two or three or four ago. But we have to get in the game. We have to have some leverage. We've got dollars, and I'm convinced that I want to get us more leverage with our votes, but I think we may be able to get more leverage with our dollars. But we have to start having the commitment to do that.
Regarding the big companies like Google and so forth, they're kind of the biggest threats to us here too, I think, especially how they're trying to rig the current election, the coming election. They really are concertedly taking out pro-Trump people off of their platforms. I'm really dubious about dealing with these companies anymore. I mean, I don't. This week I stopped regularly posting to Facebook. I've been very, very active on Facebook for 10 years, and I just stopped. I'm on Gab, and I'm regular on Gab, and I post occasionally to Facebook. And I'm pulling back. And I really suggest people. I think everybody needs a platform that's not Facebook or not Twitter or one of those things, because at any time, anyone who has an opinion that's against what the media wants, what the they're going to take you out. They can take
Yes.
you out at any
Yes.
time. So you should have a
Well,
backup. You should have a backup at least.
I know how some people, especially on the conservative side, have always been concerned about somehow our government allowing international law, the UN, to come in and dictate to us. Um, but one of the most outrageous examples of that, and we talked about it at thisiscommonsense.org in a script earlier this year, was YouTube's CEO or chief financial officer, I'm not sure which one it was, said that basically any medical advice or discussion or information that was outside the lines of the World Health Organization, which is, I think Donald Trump thinks, I think he's right, is in bed with Xi Jinping and the Chinese in Beijing, and look, any UN organization, but here is a UN organization in disrepute, and YouTube's head honcho says we're gonna take anything and censor it if it doesn't follow who the World Health Organization is advocating. I mean, that is outrageous. And that's a level of censorship that hits you and me and the average person. That's a level of censorship. And I call it censorship. They got a right to do what they want. But as I heard someone mention on a program today, they have a right because Congress carved out a special, exemption for them. So they are kind of a creature of Congress in a sense. And anyway, it's censorship in the sense that it has the threat, at least, of severely diminishing the kind of debate that we have in this country about important topics. And when we're talking about a coronavirus that has killed, almost 200,000 people and could be here for a long time, we want that debate. We don't want some government from on high telling us, no one can say anything except inside these little lines that some international agency told us we could step in, we could talk in. That's the response of communist China. That's the response they had to the coronavirus. And again, it's not government, but it's private monopoly like government created private companies, and it's scary. And again, I'm not calling for the government to shut them down. I'm not knowledgeable enough or how I would tweak, whatever law Congress put together to give them, their little exemption on some of these antitrust and other business issues. But we as consumers have some say so, and we can move away from YouTube. And I use YouTube a lot. I'm on Facebook a lot. I've got to move away from them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you never post anything on Facebook, or you don't use something that's on YouTube if you think it's valuable to use. But it does mean we've got to start developing an alternative so that we can make that move. And if nothing else, so that we can force their hand and make them treat us like they ought to treat people they want as customers.
Getting them to do the right thing is difficult, but your Tuesday piece was about somebody actually doing the right thing, which it's such an odd thing to write about.
It is, especially for us, right? But I got such great feedback on it.
Oh, did you?
Yes, it got a lot of good feedback. And really, it was all about, in Georgia, they had these kids that had been sex trafficked and so on. And the, local, federal law enforcement, they tracked them, they got them, they rescued the kids, they arrested the people. A horrible crime, but a wonderful police governmental response. It's why we have government. It's not that you couldn't hire, if you're rich, some, person, secret agent to, hunt down and find your kid. But most of us don't have those kind of resources. We've got to pull together and protect ourselves. And what more horrific thing than a child being taken and sex trafficked? And thank goodness that, we have a government that can do that. That's something government should do. We all agree, and it feels good to see it happen and to appreciate it. Um, and it seems to me and this is something, Tim, you're always good at, is pointing out that, when government does 67,000 things, including about 66,999 that they shouldn't be doing, the one thing they should be doing tends to suffer, or the 17 things or whatever. And it's true. We all see it. I mean, everyone says they can multitask, but most of us are not very good jugglers. And government ought to be doing that which we cannot do for ourselves. That's a principle. It's not a political principle so much. It's just a common sense principle. And you see so much of, I think, the response to the pandemic has been, government rushing to send people money and so on, when it was, wait a second, I mean, my wife and I both got a check for $1,200. Why? Was that supposed to help the pandemic? I mean, it was nice. I wish you'd send it all back. I mean, come on, it's silly. So I think we have a government that spends so much because we have been lazy and weak about saying, you know what, people are going to have to, they're going to have to do for themselves here. They're going to, there's some problems that somebody else other than the government has to deal with: churches, civics groups, and so on.
I noticed that there's a certain similarity, I guess, at the background there for the next one, which I guess is Wednesdays, it's called Bathtub Fails, because once again we're here about.
Oh, you skipped one.
What?
You skipped one.
Did I?
You skipped. Well, you left California. The title to that, Tim, was Leave California, but you were so far ahead that you just left California.
Oh wow, I thought that was okay.
That was the next one.
Is it? Okay.
But
Yeah,
the
I
truth
went
is,
right by it. September 2nd. You're right.
well, but you know what? We're just gonna. This shows just a tremendous ability to pivot and go with the flow.
We're nothing
We
if
ought
not
to-
pivot. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Bathtub Fails, which was actually Thursdays, but it's also about the coronavirus, about the pandemic. I invented a new word.
Yeah.
Well, especially because at the end of this piece, I point out that pandemic and panic, or panic is contained in the word pandemic. So I really should pronounce it correctly, I think. But anyway, this is really about Tim Harford, who wrote a piece in the Daily Mail, and what he said basically was, you're more likely to hurt yourself in the bathtub if you take baths throughout a year period than you are to die from the coronavirus. And maybe it was that you would die in the bathtub because it would shock people. We used to deal with weird statistics like this in like high school and college debate. But it would shock people how many people are hurt or die in accidents in and around the bathtub. But it's not the sort of thing to where we've outlawed bathtubs, and it's not the sort of thing to where we have shut down society to make sure that there's no bathtubs anywhere, and to make sure that nobody stumbles upon a bathtub. And the point he was basically making is there are all kinds of risks we have to assess those risks, and we have to also live our lives. I mean, you have the risk every time you get in a car that you could be killed in a car accident. Um, and it's not a infinitesimal risk, but it's small enough that almost everyone in our society has decided they're going to get in a car anyway. Um, and so the implication of his piece is maybe we ought not to shut down society. Um, and of course, for people who believe in freedom, we don't even have to go to this sort of do we shut down society or do we not shut down society? We could actually say to society as government, here is what we believe we know about this. And one of the things is we ought to admit what we don't know. And it always seems to me that, like, if government had perfect knowledge, I, for one, would still be against them dictating how the rest of us live. But when you don't have perfect knowledge, when you don't really know whether a mask is a terrible thing to wear or it's a thing that should be mandatory because it's so wonderful, when you don't know how a virus is being spread, when you don't know all kinds of things about a threat, dictating by law and by police enforcement that somehow, you have to do this and that, but not that. You can't try this. I mean, it's a slavery of sorts, and it's a control that's not helpful. And part of the reason I think it's not helpful, like on the whole shutdown, I think if I were governor of a state, I would have said, and it would have made some difference depending on how much, virus was out there and what the threat was. But I would have asked people to do the right thing. And here's what I think that is. And it would have been open your business when you think you can open it in a way that's safe. And I think that alone, instead of shutting it down, would have had thousands of business people thinking through what needs to be done. And one or two or 8 or 20 of them would have thought of things that nobody else would have thought of. And they might have publicized it, and that might have changed things. We want all of society involved in thinking about how we solve problems. We don't want everyone to be like a little, a little robot, and everything's decided in Washington or in the state capitol or at City Hall. We want people using their thinking caps. And that means freedom. We also don't want to tell people that your business means nothing. And so the fact that you are young and have almost no chance, you have no comorbidities, or other illnesses that would could become a comorbidity, and but you have to like sit in place and not open your business. And at the same time, we have no right to tell people who do have compromised situations that you have to do something to go out in society. Let the people who are compromised take the precautions. Can always do things to help. Let the people who want to open their business or to do basic things that you should be able to do in a free society, do them. Freedom would be the best way to allow people to make millions, billions of individual decisions about what risks they're willing to take and what risks they're not willing to take, and to look for their own ways to make their lives as normal as possible under the circumstances, knowing in sort of a wisdom of crowds that people are going to think of things that can be used and replicated all over the country, maybe all over the world. Again, communicating respect for the people and freedom empowers a lot of brains to be thinking about how to deal with this crisis instead of all of us waiting for the CDC to tell us, and it makes some sense that, well, look, the CDC, Paul, I'm not a doctor, I don't know these things, I'm not an epidemiologist or whatever. Come on, we got to have the experts. Except the problem is there's a lot of experts and they don't all agree. And the ones who are going to be on TV telling us stuff are the experts that the politicians chose. And look, some of those politicians, maybe it was the expert chosen by Donald Trump. Maybe it was the expert chosen by Nancy Pelosi. Should those two experts get together and tell us all what to do? I mean, I don't think we want our politicians deciding all of our medical issues. But in this coronavirus, that's kind of the way that things have transpired. We need that. Look, we're a free people. We're as educated almost as anybody anywhere in the world. We're smart people. It's like when we have these disasters, floods or different things, and the National Guard's going in, but they never call, like all these people in surroundings say, come help. And I remember with Katrina, you had so many people go down to New Orleans to help because they felt like the help wasn't coming. But we are very capable people, and like people everywhere, the more it is a partnership. I'm not I'm pretty darn skeptical of government, but I don't think it's impossible for there to be some respect for our government, and for that to happen, I think there's got to be some respect from the government for us because we're the boss. And so, I think that is possible. And you get to a pandemic, and you kind of see the need for that in a war. You kind of expect the military type command and control, but in something like this, it seems to me that we continually do not expect the public to be engaged. We are the government in theory and in our civics class, but the government never really expects the public to be connected in any way. We're told what to do. We do what they tell us. That's our role, and that's not helpful. It's not a good cohesive, functional society that handles things like this very well.
Well, that was Thursday, and I skipped right over Wednesday, which you noted. Do you want to deal with Wednesdays?
I think if we don't deal with it, I could just go hire an attorney and sue you for having you skipped over it, and that just ruined everything. No, let's leave California. I'm sure there was a lot of laughter out in the online video watching world that you had left California. The title of it was Leave California, and this is about Uber and Lyft and the gig economy and California's Assembly Bill 5, which has been in court on all kinds of things. Assembly Bill 5 basically tries to make everybody have to be an employee. If you're a freelancer, you can only do so much freelancing with a company before they have to make you an employee. So for someone like me who works with a number of freelancers and always have, you basically, if you worked with a freelancer who happened to live in California, you'd have to kind of say, are you going to move or because I don't want to violate the law, and you're not, the job you're doing is a part-time thing, and almost every freelancer I know is not just working for me. So they've got a number of different things. It'd be like acting like every customer for a cleaners needs to bring in enough business that cleaner could live, and raise a family of 4. Well, I just don't have that much cleaning. I'm sorry. And I don't have that much editorial work or different, or petition work or whatever it is. to be able to, allow people to have big families and retire with a pension. And so everyone I know who is an independent contractor hates AB5. And Lyft and Uber have been in court recently. Something said, look, they have to abide by it. A new court decision came in and said, nope, for now they can continue without abiding by it. But that's just it's a stay. It's temporary, and at some point the court's either going to uphold AB5 or not. In regard to them, there are 67. I don't know the exact number, but there are a lot of other litigation, other lawsuits by different people who think that this is simply the government telling them they can no longer make money in a way that should be perfectly legal. And what I think is pretty obviously behind it is that the gig economy and is not what the Democrats like. They like unions, and they seem to like big business, where you can pay big benefits, although that seems to be a thing of the past. So what I think is most interesting, and basically I'm saying leave California to Uber and Lyft, that if the courts come down and say you have to abide by AB5 and you have to completely change your business model, don't try to, do it halfway. Leave and let the people of California who have been getting cheaper, better trips. I mean, I don't think I've ever done Lyft. Maybe I have, but I've done Uber a number of times. And I'm one of these people. Yeah, I'm older, I guess, mentally or something. But it took a while before I used Uber. It just seemed like I knew how to hail a cab. And I had to do something with my phone. I had to master technology. But once you use Uber, and I have a very good rating, I think I'm a 5. But once you use it, you've got, it's so easy. And I've had nothing but good experiences, and I've had plenty of them. And, one of the funny things is it's this idea that these people driving for Uber can't, they're starving because they can't make enough money, and they don't get benefits and all those different things. Well, they drive some nice cars, and I'm not saying that they're rich because they're working, and they're working usually more than just the Uber job. So they're hustling. And they've got 2 jobs, and they're focused. They seem like awfully good people. They're well dressed, well maintained cars, nice cars, and you talk to them and they're positive and they're thinking about the world as it is and how they can make their way in it. When I hear people talk about them as if they're poor, suffering, oppressed folks, I'd like to just make them sit in the car with me for one of those rides. Because I just don't, you have to have never been on an Uber to think that that this is some oppressive system. It's beyond silly.
Thank you for stopping in to listen to This Week in Common Sense starring Paul Jacob. Paul Jacob writes a column 5 days a week at thisiscommonsense.org. This podcast can be found on Stitcher, Apple, Google, and Pocket Cast, and probably quite a few other podcatchers, and on SoundCloud, where it is hosted.